In the quiet suburbs of Pennsylvania, a young woman's laughter once echoed through the walls of her home. It was the sound of comfort, of friendship, of love, of ordinary evenings that felt safe. But one night that laughter fell silent. Just 25 minutes. That's all it took for everything to change. In that short span of time, a choice was made, one that could never be undone. She told him it was over, that she needed space, time, a future that didn't involve constant tension. He walked away, quietly. Neighbors saw nothing unusual. The night seemed calm. But calm doesn't always mean peace. And 25 minutes later, he came back. What happened next would leave investigators stunned, families shattered, and an entire town searching for answers. How could love turn into heartbreak so quickly? And what really happened inside that home, in those final 25 minutes? This is the story of Alyssa Wiest, and the man who couldn't let go. This isn't just a story of loss. It's a story about choices, and how moments of emotion can rewrite lives forever. In the heart of Montgomery County, nestled along the Schuylkill River, sits a quiet community, Conshohocken. A place where neighbors wave from porches, where the hum of trains fades into evening light, and where stories like this aren't supposed to happen. But one evening in late 2023, that peace was shattered. News spread quickly, a young woman full of promise gone far too soon. For those who knew her, it felt impossible to understand. How could something so tragic unfold in such an ordinary place? To understand what happened, we have to start with who she was. Alyssa Wiest was 24 years old, a scientist, a sister, a friend, and a daughter whose future seemed limitless. She worked in a research laboratory, spending her days surrounded by data, chemistry, and quiet determination. Her colleagues described her as brilliant, humble, and endlessly kind. She loved the little things, hiking trails on weekends, old records, spontaneous road trips with friends. To everyone around her, Alyssa represented calm, a steady presence in an unpredictable world. But behind the calm was also commitment. She believed deeply in people, in giving second chances and helping those she cared about find their way. And one of those people was a man named Michael Dutkiewicz. Michael wasn't a stranger. He and Alyssa had built a connection. What began as friendship turned into something deeper. At first, they seemed like any young couple. Dinners out, messages late into the night, shared dreams about the future. But as time went on, the relationship became more complicated. Michael struggled with the idea of distance, emotionally and at times physically. Those who knew Alyssa say she began to pull back, gently at first, then firmly, determined to find peace again. Friends noticed her trying to move forward. She focused on work, spent more time with family, rediscovered joy in the little things. But love, especially when it turns into loss, can become unpredictable. On a cold November night, that unpredictability became irreversible. And within minutes, a community that had once felt untouched by tragedy would never be the same again. Before we continue this story, I want to take a moment to pause, to honor a life that was filled with light, laughter, and love. If you're watching this, take a deep breath. Hold a quiet thought for Alyssa Wiest, for her family, and for everyone whose lives were forever changed. May her memory remind us to cherish each day, to speak kindness, and to never take peace for granted. Amen. Alyssa Wiest was the kind of person who didn't just walk into a room, she brightened it. Her friends described her as the definition of kindness, someone who believed deeply in the good of others. To meet her once was to feel like you'd known her forever. She grew up in Pennsylvania, surrounded by love, laughter, and the warmth of a close-knit family. Her parents, proud and devoted, often said Alyssa was born curious. While most children asked why the sky was blue, Alyssa wanted to know how it worked, what made it blue, what made the world tick. She had an older brother and a younger cousin she adored, and she took on the role of encourager, the one who cheered for everyone else's dreams as if they were her own. That selfless spirit would become one of her defining traits. As Alyssa grew, so did her fascination with science. She loved the precision of it, the idea that answers could be found through patience and observation. Her notebooks were filled with sketches, formulas, and ideas that most people would find daunting, but for her, they were beautiful. She studied microbiology, driven by a belief that understanding the smallest parts of life could lead to the biggest changes. Professors often said she had the kind of mind that didn't just memorize, it understood. But it wasn't just her intelligence that stood out. It was her compassion. In a world where competition can be harsh, Alyssa was the one who stayed late to help a classmate. She celebrated others' successes as if they were her own. To her, science wasn't just about data, it was about people. Her friends remember her laughter, easy, genuine, contagious. She had a way of making ordinary days feel special. Whether it was study sessions that turned into midnight karaoke or quiet nights watching old movies, she was the glue that held everyone together. She listened more than she spoke. When friends were going through something, Alyssa was the person they called. And she never judged, she simply listened and reminded them that better days were always ahead. She once wrote in her planner, "You never know what someone is carrying, be gentle." Those words would later become a small but powerful echo of who she truly was. Alyssa worked at a research lab not far from home. She spent her mornings analyzing samples and her afternoons mentoring interns, guiding younger students who looked up to her. She loved her job, but what she loved most was the idea of inspiring other young women to chase science without fear. She believed every girl should know that her curiosity was powerful, that intelligence and kindness could coexist beautifully. In a field often dominated by competition, Alyssa led with compassion. And her co-workers saw her not just as a scientist but as a light. To her family, Alyssa was the heart of everything. She called her parents every day, even if just to say goodnight. She was deeply loyal, protective, and grateful. Her mother once said, "Alyssa never forgot where she came from, and she never stopped saying thank you." She also had a small group of close friends who described her as an old soul. She believed in handwritten notes, morning walks, and the power of forgiveness. Her calm energy had a way of grounding everyone around her. But sometimes, the kindest hearts are the ones that never see the storm coming. Michael Dutkiewicz grew up in what many would call a normal family. A small-town childhood, tree-lined streets, backyard barbecues, a close but quiet household. On the surface, everything seemed steady. But beneath that image were quiet storms of pressure and insecurity, emotions he carried into adulthood and into his relationship with Alyssa. Michael was the youngest of two. His parents, hardworking and devoted, often described him as bright, the kind of kid who could take things apart and put them back together again. But while he excelled in logic and structure, emotion was a language he struggled to master. His father worked long hours, often away from home. His mother, caring but cautious, taught her son to keep things together, to stay calm, to not let emotions show. That lesson, to hold everything in, became his armor. But armor can become heavy when worn too long. Friends from school remembered him as quiet, not unfriendly, just reserved. He was intelligent, thoughtful, even artistic in moments, but there was a side to him few really knew. He didn't open up easily. And when he did, it was usually about things that weighed on him deeply. Over time, Michael's pattern became familiar. He'd connect deeply, care intensely, but struggle when things changed, when life didn't go according to plan. A teacher once described him as brilliant under pressure, but fragile when pushed emotionally. Years later, as an adult, those same emotional battles followed him. He worked steady jobs, sometimes in technical fields, but his life lacked clear direction. He wanted meaning, stability, love, but he also feared loss. It was a cycle of hope and hesitation, calm and restlessness. And then one day he met Alyssa. It wasn't an extraordinary beginning. They met through mutual circles, perhaps at work or a nearby event, two young adults simply crossing paths at the right moment. Michael was drawn to Alyssa's warmth, her laughter, her calm energy. She, in turn, saw something genuine in him, a quiet sincerity that felt safe. At first, their connection was easy. Late-night conversations about goals, about family, about what they both wanted in life. They shared playlists, favorite coffee spots, even small traditions that made ordinary days special. Friends remember how Michael looked at her, the kind of look that said he'd finally found someone who understood him. And for a while that seemed true. For Alyssa, he was kind, attentive, even gentle. But love, especially young love, often carries hidden layers. And beneath the warmth, small cracks began to form. At first they were small, moments anyone might overlook. A missed text returned with silence. A change in tone when plans changed. Michael's easygoing nature began to tighten around expectation. Friends who spent time with the couple noticed how Michael's mood sometimes shifted quickly. If Alyssa grew busy with work or friends, he seemed withdrawn, sometimes quiet, sometimes distant. But when she returned his attention, he'd brighten immediately as though all was forgiven. It wasn't anger. It was attachment, deep, consuming, and difficult to manage. He wanted to be her world, but she was still building one of her own. And that difference, that space between independence and dependence, began to widen. Over time, Alyssa began to notice small changes. Messages that felt anxious, questions that seemed unnecessary, subtle signs of mistrust. Friends say she handled it with grace, trying to reassure him to help him feel secure. But reassurance can't cure fear. And Michael's fear of being left behind was growing faster than he could admit. To outsiders, Michael appeared fine. He went to work, paid bills, smiled when people greeted him. He posted pictures, talked about plans, even mentioned how much Alyssa meant to him. But internally, something had shifted, a quiet unease building beneath every smile. He began overthinking. Every unanswered text, every delay, every moment apart, it became proof of something that wasn't there. He didn't see it as control, he saw it as care. But care, when fueled by fear, can become a cage. Sometimes, love doesn't end with a fight. It ends with silence, slow, quiet, and painful in its stillness. For Alyssa and Michael, what began as connection and promise slowly became confusion and distance. The laughter that once filled their world began to fade, replaced by long pauses, shorter texts, and questions that never found answers. Friends began to notice subtle changes. Alyssa, who was once radiant and expressive, grew quieter. She canceled plans, spent more time alone, and avoided talking about the relationship. Her friends said she still cared, deeply, but something inside her was shifting. She was learning to let go. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you cared about, you know how hard that can be. Tell me in the comments, do you think people can truly change once trust starts to fade? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Communication became harder. Michael, once calm and collected, began to text more frequently, sometimes checking in several times a day. To him it felt like care. To Alyssa, it began to feel like control. Those close to her said she never spoke badly of him. She was patient, thoughtful, and always tried to understand. But deep down, she knew that no matter how much she reassured him, it wasn't enough. Boundaries are not walls, they're bridges of respect. But when one person refuses to cross with understanding, the bridge begins to crumble. Days turned into weeks. Alyssa focused on her career, her lab work, her studies, her friends. She wanted to rebuild her routine, to return to herself. Meanwhile, Michael struggled with the space between them. He sent longer messages, heartfelt apologies, promises of change. But Alyssa had already reached a place of peace. Not anger, not resentment, just quiet acceptance. Would you say closure comes from talking things through, or from finally letting go? Take a second and drop your answer in the comments below. I really want to know what you think. Michael began to sense the distance growing. Every unanswered call, every pause before a reply, it began to echo in his mind. He started revisiting old photos, rereading their messages, searching for clues about where it all went wrong. Friends who saw him described a man who looked lost in thought, quiet, distracted, almost haunted by the idea of losing something he couldn't control. He wasn't angry. Not yet. Just desperate to hold on to something already slipping away. Meanwhile, Alyssa confided in a close friend. She said she wanted to end things peacefully, without drama or hostility. She believed both of them deserved clarity and freedom. Her plan was simple: to meet one last time, talk things through, and finally move forward. She wasn't afraid. She was hopeful that closure could bring calm. If you've ever been in a situation where saying goodbye felt harder than staying, what did you do? Would you have met in person or kept your distance? Comment below. Your perspective might help someone watching this right now. In the final days of their relationship, Alyssa tried to end things with grace. She wanted peace, not conflict. She believed that by being honest and calm, they could both move forward. But what followed was silence. A silence that would echo louder than words. That night she made a choice, one she believed would bring peace. But 25 minutes later, her world would change forever. Every story has a moment, a single point in time where everything changes. For Alyssa and Michael, that moment came on a cold Pennsylvania night. A night that began with hope for closure, and ended in silence. That evening, Alyssa invited Michael over to talk. She wanted to end things peacefully, not out of anger but out of love for her own future. Neighbors later said the home was quiet that night. No raised voices. No visible tension. Just quiet. She told him she needed space. That she wished him well, but it was time for both of them to move forward. And so he left. 25 minutes. That's how long it took for everything to change. Investigators would later discover a digital trail, a sequence of online searches that would leave everyone stunned. In those 25 minutes, Michael's phone revealed a restless mind. He searched for information, for clarity, and for something irreversible. It was as if the world paused. Outside, the streets were silent. Inside, Alyssa's home was calm, her phone lighting up with new messages, her world still turning, unaware of what was coming. Have you ever had a moment where you felt something heavy in the air, as if you knew something was about to happen but couldn't explain why? Tell me in the comments if you've ever experienced that kind of intuition. Sometimes, the heart senses what the mind refuses to see. According to digital records, a phone that had once been stationary began to move again. The route traced a short path, one that led straight back toward Alyssa's home. Street cameras later captured a vehicle matching Michael's description turning down her road. The timestamp, just under half an hour later. The distance wasn't far. But in that short drive, a storm was forming, one that couldn't be undone. At approximately 9:36 p.m., Alyssa's doorbell camera flickered on. The footage, later obtained by investigators, would capture the final moments before everything went still. There was no shouting, no alarm, just a faint sound of movement, and then silence. And just like that, a quiet neighborhood fell into a silence it had never known before. Moments later, neighbors noticed something unusual, a sound they couldn't place. Concerned, someone called authorities. Patrol units were dispatched within minutes. First responders arrived to a scene that felt frozen in time. They found the door slightly ajar, the home quiet. Inside, the air heavy, still, almost motionless. The clock read just after 9:40 p.m. If you were a neighbor that night, hearing something strange, seeing lights flicker, feeling that unease, would you have gone outside? Or would you have called for help right away? Let me know in the comments below. What would you have done? By morning, the story had already reached every corner of Conshohocken. Friends began calling, messages poured in, and disbelief filled the air. Alyssa Wiest, a scientist, a dreamer, a kind and steady soul, was gone. And the man she once trusted was in custody. The next hours would reveal everything: the timeline, the digital searches, and the truth behind those 25 minutes. But even before investigators spoke, the question echoed everywhere: why? If you could send one message to Alyssa's family tonight, one word of comfort, one thought of peace, what would it be? Share it in the comments below. Because when we remember her name, we remind the world that compassion still matters. When the first responders arrived that night, the street was eerily still. Only the hum of the police radios and the faint echo of voices broke the silence. But within hours, what started as confusion began to take shape. Investigators were about to unravel a timeline that told a story far deeper than anyone expected. Michael's name quickly surfaced, not through witness accounts but through the cold, meticulous eyes of technology. Every click, every timestamp, every mile traveled was about to be retraced. Detectives began with what they always start with: the last known moments. The ring footage, though blurred, showed a pattern: footsteps, headlights, a pause. It wasn't just evidence, it was a heartbeat frozen in time. Each piece of data, from phone signals to car GPS logs, became a puzzle piece. They reconstructed the final 25 minutes like a movie playing in reverse. At 8:37 p.m., Michael's phone pinged near a local park. At 8:49, a search was made on his browser, something about routes and distance. And by 9:02 p.m., his car was back on that same suburban street. Investigators didn't just see coordinates, they saw emotion. A sequence of choices driven by frustration, confusion, and heartbreak. The lead detective later said it was one of the most chilling timelines he'd ever reconstructed. Not because of violence but because of silence. Every moment that passed was a quiet descent into finality. The ring footage helped narrow the time window to mere minutes. The faint hum of an engine, the passing shadow near the porch, and then nothing. Just stillness. From that moment on, the case moved fast. Search warrants were issued. Michael's vehicle was seized. And within hours, officers uncovered what prosecutors would later call a meticulously planned but emotionally driven act. Among the recovered evidence was the item, hidden but traceable. It linked directly back to Michael through forensic examination and purchase records. When brought in for questioning, Michael initially denied everything. He spoke calmly, even respectfully, but there was a tremor in his tone, a crack that told detectives there was more beneath the surface. Hours passed. Then, faced with the mountain of evidence, GPS logs, messages, and digital traces, he finally acknowledged his actions. Not through a confession of intent, but through quiet acceptance. He whispered, "I didn't plan it like this." Those words echoed through the interview room, a mixture of guilt, shock, and loss. The investigation wasn't just about what happened, it was about why it happened. Detectives pieced together the emotional timeline as carefully as the digital one. Messages between Michael and Alyssa painted a heartbreaking story, two people trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. Alyssa's texts were filled with understanding and distance, Michael's with longing and confusion. For investigators, it wasn't just another file. It was a portrait of a modern tragedy, one built not on hatred but on heartbreak and human frailty. And as they gathered in the briefing room that morning with evidence laid out across the table, one detective reportedly said, "Technology told us what happened, but emotion told us why." Before we continue, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think technology has made it easier or harder to uncover the truth in modern investigations? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your insights. And if you're finding this story as gripping as we are to tell it, don't forget to tap like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because in the next section, we'll uncover how the courtroom became a battlefield for truth, memory, and consequence. In the end, the truth wasn't hidden in darkness. It was written in data, every click, every mile, every moment leading to a night that changed everything. Months had passed since that tragic night. Months of interviews, analysis, and emotional preparation. And finally, the day arrived when the story would no longer belong to investigators or journalists, but to a courtroom. Inside the hushed halls of justice, the air was thick with tension. Family members filled the benches, their eyes fixed on the man who once shared laughter, dinners, and quiet evenings with Alyssa. Now he sat behind a polished defense table, his hands folded, his gaze lowered. Michael Dukiewicz. The world saw two versions of the same story that day. One told through facts, cold, chronological, and unflinching. The other through emotion, filled with pain, regret, and the haunting question of why. The prosecution began with precision. They laid out Michael's digital trail, the online searches, the drive back, the hidden item. Every timestamp became a thread of intent. To them, this wasn't a moment of impulse. It was a choice made in heartbreak, but still a choice. They reminded the jury that every step, every message, and every movement that night spoke louder than any apology ever could. Then came the defense. They didn't deny the act, they couldn't. Instead, they painted a picture of a man unraveling emotionally, caught in a spiral of despair and confusion. They argued that it wasn't hatred that fueled his actions, it was heartbreak. That this was not the act of a monster, but of a man who simply lost control of his world. As testimony unfolded, emotions in the courtroom grew heavier. Experts took the stand, digital analysts, psychologists, and law enforcement officials, each helping the jury piece together the moments leading to that night. Alyssa's family sat quietly through it all. They didn't speak, but their silence was powerful, the kind that carried both sorrow and strength. One of Alyssa's friends testified softly about her final days, recalling how Alyssa was trying to move forward, to rebuild her happiness. It was a moment that broke the room's composure. Even the judge paused briefly before allowing the proceedings to continue. When closing arguments arrived, the contrast between the two sides could not have been sharper. The prosecutor stood before the jury and said, "This case is not about vengeance. It's about accountability. Alyssa's voice can't be heard, but the evidence speaks for her." Then the defense made their final plea. They asked for mercy, reminding the court that one moment of emotional collapse had destroyed two lives, not one. The jury deliberated for nearly 6 hours. 6 hours of silence, tension, and reflection. And when they finally returned, every seat in the room seemed to hold its breath. The clerk stood, verdict in hand. As the words echoed through the courtroom, they struck like thunder, final, irreversible. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Michael Dukiewicz, guilty of first-degree murder." Michael's head lowered. He didn't cry, didn't speak. But for the first time since his arrest, he whispered something barely audible, a simple, broken, "I'm sorry." For Alyssa's family, it wasn't triumph. It was closure. Tears flowed quietly, hands held tightly. Justice had spoken, but it couldn't bring her back. The judge's voice was calm but heavy as he delivered the sentence. Life imprisonment without parole. There were no outbursts, no cheers, just the sound of quiet breathing and the faint shuffle of papers. As the courtroom emptied, Alyssa's mother reportedly said, "It's not about revenge. It's about peace for her and for us." Those words lingered long after the camera stopped rolling. Before we move on, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think justice was truly served in this case? Was the sentence fair, or should emotional distress have played a greater role in the outcome? Share your thoughts below. Your perspective helps keep these stories alive. And if you haven't yet, please tap like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the final section of this story. One that reminds us that even in tragedy, there can be lessons worth carrying forward. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. Justice had spoken, and with it came the weight of both love and loss. In that silence, Alyssa's story found its ending, and her memory, its voice. From heartbreak came purpose. From silence, a voice. And from loss, a light that refuses to fade. In the months following the trial, Alyssa's family and friends made a choice, not to let her story be defined by tragedy, but by hope. They established something remarkable, the Alyssa Rose Foundation. It began small, a local scholarship, a candlelight gathering, but its purpose was vast. To honor Alyssa's passion for science, her kindness toward others, and her dream of empowering young women to believe they could change the world. The foundation soon grew beyond Pennsylvania. Students from across the state began applying for the Alyssa Rose Memorial Scholarship, designed to help young women pursue careers in microbiology, medicine, and public health. Every recipient carried not just a name on paper, but a story, Alyssa's story, of compassion, intelligence, and quiet strength. Her former professors often spoke of her relentless curiosity. How she stayed late in the lab, double-checking results not because she had to, but because she wanted to know more. That hunger for discovery became a symbol, one that continues to inspire future scientists even now. But the legacy of Alyssa Rose Wiest goes far beyond the classroom. Her life has become a gentle reminder about emotional awareness, respect, and the importance of recognizing when love turns unhealthy. Community organizations have since partnered with local advocacy groups to promote relationship awareness programs, teaching young adults how to recognize early signs of emotional strain, control, or imbalance. Because sometimes a conversation, just one, can save a life. Alyssa's parents continue to speak at schools and events, using their daughter's light to guide others. Her mother once said during a local memorial, "If Alyssa's story helps even one person pause, helps one person walk away from anger, then her spirit lives on." That message has reached thousands. It's been shared across campuses, community centers, and online forums where people struggling with heartbreak find hope instead of rage. And in that, Alyssa's legacy has found its strength. Alyssa Wiest's story began with love, not tragedy. She was a daughter, a friend, a scientist, a dreamer. And though her life was cut short, her light continues to reach far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Because even in her absence, Alyssa continues to teach us something vital, that compassion must never be mistaken for weakness. That love should never exist without respect. And that the smallest act of kindness can ripple further than we'll ever know. Before we close tonight's documentary, I want to hear from you. What do you believe Alyssa's story teaches us about love, awareness, and emotional strength? Let me know in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share Alyssa's story so that her light can continue reaching others who may need to hear it. Together, we can help ensure that her life inspires, teaches, and protects those still searching for hope. This is more than a story of tragedy, it's a story of transformation. Because even in the darkest moments, light finds a way through. Alyssa's light still shines, and it always will. And so, we come to the end of this story. A story that began with love, one filled with laughter, promise, and a bright future ahead. A story that reminds us just how fragile life can be, and how quickly emotion can alter the course of everything we hold dear. But most importantly, this is a story that continues. Because while Alyssa's life was tragically cut short, her light hasn't dimmed. It shines in every scholarship awarded through the Alyssa Rose Foundation. It echoes in every classroom where young women are learning that they can make a difference. And it glows quietly in every conversation where someone finds the courage to walk away from a situation that doesn't feel right. Alyssa's story is not just about what was lost. It's about what was left behind. A reminder to all of us, that even in heartbreak there can be healing. That from tragedy there can be transformation. And that the legacy of one person's kindness can inspire thousands more to live with empathy and awareness. If you've watched this far, thank you. Thank you for listening with your heart, and for helping keep Alyssa's memory alive. Because every view, every comment, every share, it all keeps her story reaching someone new. Someone who might need a moment of reflection, a reminder to breathe, or simply the courage to choose peace over pain. Before we close tonight's documentary, I'd love to ask you this. What lesson from Alyssa's story will you carry with you? Do you believe emotional awareness in education should be taught more widely, in schools, in relationships, in conversations about mental health? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your voice could inspire someone else to think differently, or even to change their path for the better. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told with truth, empathy, and respect, Please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. Here on True Crime Whispers we tell the stories that matter, not for shock but for understanding. Because every story is a lesson, and every voice deserves to be heard. So if Alyssa's story touched you, share it. Let her name reach beyond Pennsylvania, beyond time, beyond tragedy, into the lives she continues to inspire. This was Alyssa's story. A story of love, loss, and the legacy of light that continues to guide us all. Because even when darkness falls, kindness, courage, and compassion will always find a way through.